This is a major win, an absolute step in the right direction, and this would not have happened without small business owners advocating for themselves on this issue. But the fight's not over, and so we still need small business owners to step up to the plate and urge Congress to make this permanent. So keep sharing your stories, keep advocating on this issue. We need you because we're going up against some pretty powerful lobbies and some law enforcement and big banks here that want this mandate on the books.
The Small Business Rundown is the official podcast of the National Federation of Independent Business, the member-driven voice of small business. Every 2 weeks, a new episode offers resources for small business owners and information on relevant laws and regulations. NFIB and our members advocate to keep U.S. small businesses strong and independent in Washington, D.C., all 50 states, and the nation's courts.
Welcome to this episode of the Small Business Rundown. I'm Dylan Rosnick, Director of Federal Government Relations here at NFIB. On this episode, we will discuss a major announcement from the Trump administration on beneficial ownership information. Joining me to discuss this major win is Director of Federal Government Relations, Josh McLeod. Josh, to start us off, can you give us a brief synopsis of what is beneficial ownership information and why should small business owners care?
So beneficial ownership is a mandate for 32.6 million small businesses. Basically, the gist of it is if you're a small business under 20 employees and 5 million in revenue, you are now required to register your beneficial ownership information, BOI, with the federal government. This law comes with massive penalties if a small business does not comply. They could face up to $10,000 penalty and 2 years in prison. We have a lot of privacy concerns regarding small business owners' information on this new database and access to the database that we can discuss further.
Absolutely. An invasive mandate with egregious penalties, big issue for small businesses. And so while we're on this topic, can you discuss what the major announcement was from the Department of Treasury and from the Trump administration yesterday and why NFIB is really claiming this as a major win for small business?
It is a major win, and that there's no other way to put it. Trump administration came out in March of 2025 and said, if you're a U.S.-based business, you no longer have to comply with beneficial ownership information reporting, which is a huge victory. However, we've been in this limbo to see what does the final rule look like, and that came out yesterday. And it is a major win for U.S. businesses who are now exempt. We also know that the Trump administration, Treasury Department, will destroy the beneficial ownership information of about 15 or 16 million small businesses that did register. However, the fight is not over. This will likely come back under a future administration. That's why we are calling on Congress to step up and either repeal the entire mandate or to make law this U.S. business exemption.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, too. For small business owners, given the fight's not over, how can small business owners join this fight and join in these efforts to get Congress to act and make this permanent while also thanking the administration for protecting their privacy?
Yeah, it's critical that right now it's the moment. We've got this huge victory, but it's not permanent. This is a temporary victory, and we have to have Congress step up to the plate here. So I would urge small business owners, listeners, reach out to your senators, reach out to your representatives in Congress, urge them to repeal this mandate. Make sure it doesn't come back on the backs of small businesses in a few years.
And going back, this is just making me think, NFIB was on an island fighting the beneficial ownership mandate on the front end. It was called the Corporate Transparency Act is the law. And so can you speak on how NFIB has spearheaded these efforts, gone against other very powerful lobbies here in D.C., even some business groups, and why it's critical for small business owners, like you said, to make their voices heard, because they could come back in a future administration or if the courts overturn this?
Yeah, it's been a huge educational rock to push up the hill to educate either small business owners or members of Congress and their staff or administrations about the impact of this mandate. So oftentimes when we would go to NFIB members, we'd say, hey, have you heard about this BOI thing? And they'd say no. In fact, when we surveyed NFIB members a few years ago, 83% had never heard of BOI. When we would go to the Hill, meet with members of Congress, it was the same thing. And so our job has been to educate, and through that education, like I said, we've generated huge support on the Hill and also in the Trump administration to hear the impact of this burden on small businesses. It is very invasive, and they've heard the calls from small business owners and from NFIB.
Absolutely. I think this is a major win, an absolute step in the right direction. And this would not have happened without small business owners advocating for themselves on this issue. But the fight's not over. And so we still need small business owners to step up to the plate and urge Congress to make this permanent. So keep sharing your stories, keep advocating on this issue. We need you because we're going up against some pretty powerful lobbies and some law enforcement and big banks here that want this mandate on the books for whatever reason they choose here, but small business owners have to stay vigilant to make sure that this never comes back.
You're right on the money, Dylan. This has been a huge effort by small businesses to make their voices known and to share their stories with members of Congress and with the administration. I don't think we can say thank you enough for the administration for the bold step that they took here. And it saved small businesses over $128 billion in compliance costs and red tape reduction. And we know that only goes to small businesses because small businesses are the only ones that have to register with FinCEN. So huge victory. It is temporary. We got to get Congress to finish the job here.
And on that note, Josh, you spoke with our champion on Capitol Hill, Representative Davidson, on the effort to repeal the beneficial ownership mandate altogether. We'll play that clip now.
Congressman Davidson, great to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for joining us to discuss this huge victory for small businesses. Would love to know a little historical background. How did you come across the BOI issue?
Well, the Democrats worked for a long time to get the Corporate Transparency Act. And, it sounds like a great name, but it presumes that every business owner is engaged in illicit finance. And obviously, it's not illegal to own a business. But if you don't know about this disclosure requirement, the Biden administration said, we're going to put you in jail for failing to report all this ownership information. And it's not even just businesses. It's a narrow business. It's 20 and fewer employees. So small businesses and even homeowners associations were looped into this. But they fought for 17, 18, 19, 20. They were all fighting to get this across the line. And Republicans were able to block it. But in 2021, they got it across the finish line by burying it into the Defense Authorization Act, and then it became law. Joe Biden implemented a rule that really expanded the scope even worse than the base text of the bill. And that's how I knew it was just Democrats were fighting to get it done before they found a way.
Yeah, you're right. The rules are written so broad that individuals with substantial control, we always equate that to, say, like the restaurant manager or someone who's not an owner, but they're still going to be registering with FinCEN. It's definitely a pretty expansive and invasive reporting regime for sure. So let's dive into the bill. So you've got a bill to repeal the entire Corporate Transparency Act. It's got over 190 co-sponsors in the House. Have you ever had a bill with that much support?
Yeah, I've never had one that had that many co-sponsors before we got a vote on it. And we did get it through committee. We haven't got a vote in the floor of the House, but we do have a commitment to do the same thing that Democrats did, which was bury it in the Defense Authorization Act. And that's a fitting way for it to go out. But we've pushed hard with the Trump administration. President Trump, early in his administration, issued an executive order. And the win you're talking about, of course, is FinCEN finalize the rules. So they did a notice of proposed rulemaking, they got input. And what they say they're doing is applying the Corporate Transparency Act, and they've narrowed the scope so that only foreign ownership entities' interests have to disclose foreign ownership. And I think that's important because you think about the name, you think, oh, this is big corporations. Well, it's just the opposite. The Chamber of Commerce lobbied to make sure it didn't affect big companies that are members of the Chamber of Commerce. And that's why NFIB is so important, getting the word out, because that's who they targeted. They basically counted on small businesses not having a big enough voice to push back. And you create this federal registry when the reality is all kinds of other means of information are collected by the government already, not the least of which is your taxes. So this is duplicative in a lot of ways for the government to gather this information. And it's overly broad because it presumes that you are engaged in illicit finance just because you operate a business or control a bank account associated with an organization.
Right. And we hear that from Chairman Hill a lot too, and the committee, that The government already has this information. Your financial institution already has this information. The Secretary of State for Ohio already has this information. Why the heck do we need this brand new database at FinCEN? So I think your point is right on the money.
Yeah, the goal's good. We want to catch illicit finance, money launderers, tax evaders, shell corporations, things like that. But it creates a presumption that you are a shell corporation if you've got a small business, and obviously that's not true. And so that's where we were winning in court. Frankly, the people that were opposed to this were winning in court anyway. But the Trump administration has stepped in. There's still court cases working their way through the court system. But, the president swears to support and defend the Constitution. So does Congress. We should just roll this back and make a common sense approach here. And, we're fighting to restore a government small enough to fit in the Constitution. This is a good place to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned the Trump administration rule, which came out this week. It's huge, right? 32 million small business owners are now exempt from the Corporate Transparency Act. Why is it critical for Congress to lock in this protection?
Yeah, so obviously there's a difference of mindset that's somewhat partisan here. So whatever the motives are, Democrats will turn it back on if they've got executive action. And this is what drives businesses nuts. They're like, I just want certainty. And what they were certain of for a while was they're facing jail and big fines if they don't disclose this information. So a lot of them did. The other big win with the rule is they've committed to delete the data that was already collected unconstitutionally. So that is a huge win, just to say, look, your data isn't going to get compromised, hacked, stolen, all these things that continually happen with federal databases, which is another bad idea, to put all the personally identifiable information and ownership structure of every small business in America in one big database. So they're deleting that data. So if you don't turn off this rule with a law, then reality is if there's a Democrat president, they'll just come back in and it'll be like ping pong. They'll knock the ball back on the other side of the net.
Right. So you mentioned the path forward, and that includes trying to get this final rule, the House Financial Services approved legislation through in something like the NDAA. What do you think the chances are that actually occurs?
Well, I was told by the White House legislative liaison and the Speaker of the House that they would get it into the final version of the Defense Authorization Act. So I believe them. I'll take their word for it. It's a commitment from them to get it done. It is something that Republicans are broadly united on. And, thanks to NFIB, this is something that's top of mind. I had a lot of colleagues come to me and they heard about the issue from NFIB, not me. So people were coming to me because of the work of NFIB and your member companies raising the issue. But we also had casework. I mean, we had a guy who was controlling the bank account as a volunteer for a homeowners association. They have no employees. He's like, we barely do anything. We just do a little bit of landscaping around the property. And even the dues are voluntary for the homeowners association. And they're telling me I got a report to FinCEN about beneficial ownership. He's like, no one owns a homeowners association. We're all volunteers. And I said, yeah, that seems odd. And let us do the casework on it. And sure enough, that's what the Biden administration wanted to make happen, and we're forcing to happen. So a lot of my colleagues heard about this from casework as well as from NFIB. And then, of course, we told the story as well. So it is through committee. It passed out of committee, HR 425, and it has over 190 co-sponsors. And the Speaker and the White House liaison for legislation has said, we're going to get it in the final passage of NDAA.
That's great. I mean, it would be a huge victory to get that done. And we appreciate you fighting for small businesses on it. How can small businesses that are listening, how can they help your fight on Capitol Hill to make this relief permanent?
Yeah, make sure people know, look, Congress needs to support the president's action here. I mean, the president took good action. He's done the right thing already under his administration. FinCEN's followed through and supported the president here with a final rule, plus deleting data. I mean, this is a good win. But if it's going to have permanence and it's going to endure, we've got to get a law across the finish line. And so make sure your member of Congress hears, hey, we need 425 in the Defense Authorization Act. Because that's really one of the things that we know, no matter what, by the end of the year, we're going to find a way to pass the Defense Authorization Act. We're going to find a way to pass a continuing resolution. If, we may not get all the regular funding done. Congress has a very consistent habit of missing the October 1st fiscal year start. but they usually have some sort of continuing resolution ahead of that. Occasionally there's a shutdown, but normally we're going to get a CR. The Senate and the House have both passed one that goes to December 4th or December 11th. So one of those sort of last trains leaving the station usually gets loaded up with bills like this bill. And so you got to let your member of Congress know, make sure 425's in the Defense Authorization Act, and we can get it done.
Yeah. I always think about it this way. Congress created the CTA through the NDA. They can clean up the mess through the NDA. So hopefully we can get that thing done. We greatly appreciate your leadership and all your assistance to give permanent relief, and just thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting it, and thanks for just being a huge partner. You know, we've got a great coalition on privacy issues broadly. I think it's one of the most infringed parts of the Bill of Rights. It's highly limited our privacy protections. And for business owners, this was really a, big onerous burden to come out and confront. And we even had law firms saying, we're not going to touch this because we don't want liability for our junior associates and everything else. So it became very cumbersome to manage. So just because the sort of burning platforms turned off because of the executive order and the rule, let's make sure we run through the finish line here and get it done. But thank you so much for your support.
You're very welcome. Thank you, sir.
We'll have more information in the show notes where you can take action and share your story with Congress and thank the administration for this major win.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of the Small Business Rundown. Your continued support helps us amplify the issues that matter most. If you liked this episode, please help small business owners find the podcast by giving it a rating, like, or review. You can find us at nfib.com and on YouTube, X, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook.